So here it is, Terror of Mechagodzilla, the final of the Showa Era Godzilla films, and the capstone of that era as well. This film is pretty good, all things considered. It's a considerable increase from the a few years ago, where we had things like Godzilla vs. Gigan, Godzilla vs. Megalon, Godzilla vs. Hedorah, and Godzilla's Revenge. That kind of quadrilogy of films really cast Godzilla in a bad light for the basically for close to half a decade. Godzilla really ended at Destroy All Monsters, and the movies that came after for a good while were subpar at best. I mean, middle of the road is being very forgiving of a couple of them. I mean, I said Godzilla vs. Gigan was very middle of the road for me, and that's true. But keep in mind that I watched these in um, the order they were released in. So after having watched two really shitty movies, a less shitty movie by comparison seems all right. So that's a thing we need to bear in mind when talking about this. But this one is not, in my opinion, as good as Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, but this is still quite a good entry, and there's a lot of stuff going on here. Not a lot of Godzilla action, unfortunately, until the end, but this one's kind of unique in that Godzilla has to fight not one monster, but two monsters, and he doesn't have any backup this time. So that's different. That hasn't happened yet. Godzilla's either been solo or had a tag-in buddy, but this time he's got to fight two monsters. Now, Mechagodzilla's back, and basically the same from the previous incarnation. Not too much changes. He has the ability to fight without his head now. He didn't before. So that's an interesting twist, but other than that, he's basically the same. And he has an accomplice monster, a completely new monster, Titanosaurus. Now, Titanosaurus is a kind of what do I want to say? He's kind of a I don't want to say failure, but not as good as new monsters have been lately. So he's kind of a step back to the way kaiju were in the late 50s, early 60s, where he doesn't have a lot of powers. He's aquatic. He is an okay fighter, but his real only ability is he can make gale force winds with his tail, which proves to be a significant advantage, but that's about it. That's about all he can do. So he has basically the ability a flying kaiju has without being a flying kaiju himself. So that's interesting. However, I think he's an interesting design, kind of. He has like a long neck. He's kind of like just a more aquatic Godzilla, honestly. I mean, I've heard other people describe him as such. I believe uh, James Rolfe from his Godzilla-thon back in 2008 mentioned that he's just basically a more aquatic Godzilla, and for what it's worth, he basically is. So that's a thing. He interesting. He's an interesting design, a little different from what we normally see. He has a much smaller head than most other like suit kaiju like that, so it's a little different. But you give what you can. You take what you can take. He's an okay monster. I mean, if Godzilla was fighting like two monsters with all sorts of crazy powers, I don't think he'd win. I think the fact that they dubbed down Titanosaurus is because he's already fighting Mechagodzilla, and Mechagodzilla has a plethora of abilities. So let's get into this movie because there's a lot of stuff that happens in this one, and I'm going to go over it as best I can. So this picks up, and this is one of the few Godzilla movies that's more or less a direct sequel, and that's something that happens a lot with Mechagodzilla. He actually gets sequel movies for some reason. Not entirely sure why that is. None of the other kaiju really get like direct tie-in sequels where it's like fight that guy again. So that's interesting. They're looking for the remains of Mechagodzilla from the previous one, and this submarine that they're looking for him with gets attacked by this creature. It's Titanosaurus, and the crew submarine. You presume it's destroyed, vanishes, and so they're looking into this. They're looking into like aquatic dinosaurs, and they're looking into this guy who was a mad scientist named Shinzo Mifune, and he basically got laughed out of the academia for saying like he could control sea life, that he found a giant marine dinosaur. Like they all found that ridiculous. Well, this is a world where Godzilla lives, so I don't understand why finding a giant aquatic dinosaur is so strange. But okay, sure. And Mifune himself wishes vengeance upon all of mankind for basically mocking him. A classic mad scientist thing. And that's something we really haven't had that much of. A crazy mad scientist. Godzilla generally doesn't have mad scientists. Most of the enemies are created inadvertently or are space monsters or prehistoric creatures that are released. I guess you could lump that in with created inadvertently, but still. Titanosaurus, while a prehistoric beast, is part science too, because Mifune controls him and makes him do his bidding because he has that ability. He's developed the technology. So they're going to investigate into Mifune, and they don't find him, but they do find Mifune's daughter. And Mifune's daughter basically says Mifune's dead, and Mifune, before he died, burned all of his notes. So that's all there is to say about that. But the main character guy, Akira Ichinose, I think that's I can pronounce some Japanese names fine, but I'm just gonna call him Akira. So Akira is looking into this, and he ends up taking a liking to Mifune's daughter, Katsura, and he ends up falling in love with her throughout the movie. So, meanwhile, Mifune is being basically, I don't know what the exact term is, but basically, I don't want to say, he's forming a deadly alliance with the space apes from the previous movie, although they don't turn into space apes in this movie. They just wear dorky-looking helmets, which, okay, I don't know why a complete uniform change, but all right, whatever. And he's basically working with them because they're going to rebuild Mechagodzilla, and he's going to send his monster. So it's basically, we got two monsters this time, and we're going to send them out. We're going to destroy the world and rebuild it for our people. And Mifune's like, I'm down with this. Okay, so they're doing that, and Mifune, and they're going back and forth with this. The plot line with Akira and Katsura develops, but what you don't know is that, well, you do know, but he doesn't know, is Katsura is actually a cyborg, and she's been restored to life by the space aliens because she died in an experiment her and Mifune were conducting. So now she's having those cyborg woes, like, you can't love me, I'm not a real person, even though that's not really what a cyborg is, but that's fine. I'll go into a tangent on that later. So Mifune sends out Titanosaurus to go wreck some shit, even though the aliens are like, no, hold back. He's like, nah, we're doing this. So he sends out Titanosaurus on Yokosuka, and he starts trashing the place. Fortunately enough, Godzilla, ever wanting to brawl with other monsters, shows up to fight him off. And they fight him off, and they figure out how to disrupt Titanosaurus with oscillating waves or something like that. Supersonic waves of some kind. There's lots of waves that you use in this Godzilla universe. So they use waves to disrupt him, but I believe Katsura disrupts it. Like, she breaks the machine that they were using, so they couldn't do it successfully. So they recall Titanosaurus. Godzilla goes back into the ocean, and the aliens plan to basically take over everything. So they're going to send out both of them next time. Meanwhile, the Interpol guys are making a machine to fight off Titanosaurus to disrupt his control beams. So, and also they merge Katsura's mind with Mechagodzilla because it'd be easier to control that way. At least that's what I believe they do. So then the brawl for it all happens, and Godzilla has to fight Titanosaurus and Mechagodzilla, and it's a long brawl. It's a tough brawl. Godzilla's at a distinct disadvantage. He's fighting 2v1. It's a bad day, but in the end, the humans help neutralize Titanosaurus, and Godzilla throws him in the ocean. He swims off, and they end up destroying Mechagodzilla again. And well, actually, was it Katsura kills herself, I believe, and that just destroys Mechagodzilla, and Titanosaurus leaves back into the sea, and Godzilla goes back into the sea, swims off, and that is exactly what Godzilla would be doing, because this is the close of the Showa era Godzilla. No longer will the plotline of the last 20 so years be Godzilla. We're going to start with something new. Let's go off on a little bit of a tangent, a little bit of a thing. So in this movie, Katsura becomes a cyborg. Now, I think they meant to mean something more akin to an android, because my understanding of a cyborg, from all the science fiction and research I've done on such things, and being a partly retired cyborg myself, as I like to call it, is someone who has replacement parts which either help them live or augment them in some way. They're still a person, but they have basically parts to keep them alive. The reason I say I'm a retired cyborg is because I had my entire chest reconstructed and had a lot of metal and pieces put in there to maintain it. So a little bit of personal history there, but that's a little joke I have. I'm a retired cyborg because those have since been removed. But so it's just kind of funny. I think they meant to mean more of an android where she's a replacement person that might have that woman's personality, but she's not that person. But it's vague. I mean, it might have come through better in the Japanese than in the dub, because there's always stuff lost in translation when you do that. So I don't know. I don't know what exactly was going on with that, but fair enough. It was a pretty good plot, all things considered, though. And this closes the Showa era. It's a pretty good ending to the Showa era, honestly. It could have been a lot worse. Mechagodzilla was a good way to go out on. What lies in the future, however, is interesting. This picks up with some of the first Godzilla movies I ever saw, specifically Godzilla 1985 or the Japanese Return of Godzilla, which was Godzilla 1984 in Japan. And we will pick up with the Heisei era coming soon. All right, folks. Good night.